Hello and welcome to another Tri-tutors video. In today's video we're going to be doing some scene poetry questions on Sonnet 130. So as always with these videos I would firstly recommend that you go ahead and watch my analysis video on Sonnet 130 where I've gone line by line, detail by detail, gone through the poem with you and analysed all the figures of speech and poetic devices and given you some vocabulary with which to answer these questions effectively. So please go ahead and watch that if you haven't already before coming over to this video. And then I would also recommend that you go ahead and watch the video that I've made answering the questions on solitude. As you'll notice, that poetry video, the poetry questions video, is slightly longer than all the other ones, and that is because I've gone into a little bit of detail there as to how to answer poetry questions and how to go about breaking them down and answering them effectively so that you get all the marks that you deserve. So I would definitely recommend that you go watch those two videos and then come join me over here as we're going to look at some Sonnet 130 questions. So as you can see here, I've given you 4 questions, and if you tally up the marks, you'll see that it's 10 marks. So I've done this in order to mimic the exam style with which you receive your contextual poetry questions for scene poetry. So what I would recommend that you do is we're going to read through the questions together now, and then you can even set a timer to see how long it takes you to complete one section of your scene poetry questions in your exam. I always find when you get to that stage in your revision where you need to be, maybe you're a week or 2 weeks or even a month before you write an exam, timing yourself when you're doing activities is really quite helpful. So let's read through them, then you can pause the video, time yourself, write out your answers, come back and we can go through some marking guidelines. So question 1 says, explain the figure of speech in line 1. So pretty self-explanatory over here, 2-mark question, nice and simple. Remember to define what your figure of speech is and to then explain it for your 2 full marks. Question 2, evaluate the effectiveness of the speaker's use of contrasts throughout the poem. So this is a 3-mark question. So there's a little bit more that we need to do here in order to get our full marks. So firstly, we need to actually talk about what the contrasts are. So we need to define those contrasts, perhaps write a quote, explain that. Then we need to talk about how this is effective, and we're going to have to do a proper discussion there in order to achieve those 2 marks that we still need. And then we have question 3, which says refer to line 12, evaluate the diction for 2 marks. So we need to quote always the diction, provide a quote, and then evaluate it in this case or explain its effectiveness. And then question 4, refer to lines 13 to 14. How does the structure of the poem convey the speaker's intention? 3 marks over here, so we need to assess what the structure of the poem is, we need to assess what the speaker's intention is, and then provide an analysis or a link. So please go ahead, pause the video, and then come back when you're ready to go through your answers and mark them. Alright, so as always, unfortunately or fortunately for English, we don't have a specific memo that we mark from as English teachers. We use marking guidelines, so we really assess your answers based on their merit because no one's going to get the exact same answer for English, and especially for poetry, right? There's so many different interpretations and so many different things that students can glean from a poem. So when we're answering these questions now, I'm going to show you some model answers, and no one's going to have the same answers as me because we're all going to structure our answers slightly differently in our sentences, etc. But what I'm going to point out to you is where to allocate yourself marks. So as you're going through your answers now, you can take where I indicate or if you've completed that particular task or that particular checkpoint from what the question is asking. So the first question says, explain the figure of speech in line 1. So the simile of my mistress's eyes are nothing like the sun negates the cliche comparison of a lover's eyes to being as bright and warm as the sun. So there is 1 mark, explaining firstly that it's a simile and then explaining what that simile is. Now I'm going to really evaluate it and give a further explanation to get that 2nd mark. This shocks the reader as it subverts the expectation of a love poem and it emphasizes the theme of the poem. Love is not about appearance, and cliched love poems are untrue in their over-exaggerated sentiments. Remember, try and keep that rule in your head of if it's a 1-mark question, you should have 1 sentence, 2 marks, 2 sentences. So here I've explained what the figure of speech is for 1 mark, and then I've given a further explanation for that 2nd mark. Question 2. Evaluate the effectiveness of the speaker's use of contrast throughout the poem. The speaker contrasts the way his lover looks and behaves to what lovers are typically thought to be like. He shows how his lover is not conventionally attractive, as he relates how Coral is far more red than her lips red. He shows how his lover's lips are supposedly far from ideal. The use of contrast is effective as it emphasizes the speaker's message that even though his lover is not how typical poets define beauty, the speaker's love for her is true. So here we're going to get a mark for firstly when we explain the contrast and we explain what the contrast is. Then we've used an example, Coral is far more red than her lips red, and explained that example for the second mark. And then lastly, we've explained the effectiveness by linking it to the speaker's message. Question 3. Refer to line 12. Evaluate the diction. So just before we get into this question, just in general for poetry questions, remember that specificity is key, actually not just for poetry questions, but any English questions. So just keep that in mind when you do answer questions, is that you need to be specific, as we're going to see in this answer over here. The diction of treads has connotations of stepping deliberately and making a sound. This diction emphasizes how the mistress is earthly, as she makes a sound as she moves, unlike the claims of other lovers who seemingly float like goddesses. And lastly, question 4. Refer to lines 13 to 14. How does the structure of the poem convey the speaker's intention? So there's a lot of information here, but please don't worry. I'm going to read out a couple of the first sentences. I've given you basically all the different types of structure that you can use. You don't have to use all of those different ideas. You can just use one or maximum 2. The poem is a Shakespearean sonnet made up of 14 lines, which is typically used to convey the theme of love. The English sonnet is made up of 3 quatrains, which outline and develop the argument, and a rhyming couplet which provides a twist and reinforces the speaker's message. This sonnet is written in iambic pentameter with the rhyme scheme of A, B, A, B, C, D, C, D, E, F, E, F, G, G. So as you can see there, that's just worth 1 mark. So you don't have to include all of that. I'm just giving you different options. So include 1 or 2 of those aspects of the poem's structure. Then we can get on to explaining the speaker's intention and linking it in terms of how the structure conveys that intention. The speaker in Sonnet 130 seemingly subverts the expected theme of love in the 3 quatrains, as he says his lover is nothing like the sun, as he mocks cliched sentiments about love. In the rhyming couplet, the speaker provides a twist, where he proclaims his love for his mistress in spite of her supposed shortcomings, to emphasize his intention of communicating that appearance does not equal love and that love poems are inaccurate and unrealistic. So there we have our second mark, leading in a little bit to our third mark. And then to finalize that third mark, to make sure we get 3 out of 3, the structure of the sonnet thus serves the speaker's intention to contrast the cliches with the truth about love. Thank you for watching. I hope that you found this video helpful. Please remember to like and to subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you in the next video.